Hello, and thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Here's what we're looking at. A 20-degree temperature drop coming in mere minutes. What's happening near the lakefront?
A survival test for Illinois' ban on assault weapons.
The fight over an effort to tighten safety standards on rideshare companies.
Reopening our mental health care centers across the city of Chicago.
A new approach to the city's mental health services.
And Illinois is the exoneration capital of the U.S., what that title means for the new mayor's reform efforts.
But first, our top story tonight. If you're heading to the lake, not so fast. Better grab a sweater before you leave. That's because the National Weather Service is calling for a so-called pneumonia front that's set to hit Chicago's lakefront shortly. Forecasters say temperatures are expected to drop from 80 degrees to the low 50s within minutes. Joining us to explain this weather phenomenon is Paul Servatka, professor of meteorology at the College of DuPage. Paul, welcome back. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
So what
Still
exactly
warm
is?
here.
Still warm there. It's coming, I'm sure. So what exactly is a so-called pneumonia front?
Well, a pneumonia front is sort of a slang name that some local weather forecasters, I think back in Wisconsin and Milwaukee, back in the 60s came up with. It indicates what happens very often in the springtime with cold air coming in off the lake. So the winds shift around to the northeast, and that cold air off of Lake Michigan just spreads inland, and you get some really radical temperature drops.
Now, this is said to be happening around 5:40, so that's in a few minutes, honestly. We know it's still,
Yes.
I think, at last check in the 80s for a high just a few minutes ago. Now, of course, that's going to lure people out to the lake. What kind of weather can we expect for the rest of the night?
Just to give you some idea, I've been looking at the Chicago Executive Airport, used to be known as Milwaukee Airport. They dropped 17 degrees in 15 minutes. It was 81 degrees at 5:05, and at 5:20, it's 64 degrees. And that cold air is rushing southward. So O'Hare will be the next one. You guys at the studios at WTTW are probably already in the cold air. Winds will shift from the northwest at 10 to the northeast at about 15 to 20 miles an hour. So you will know instantly when it passes, and that should be sweeping through the Chicago area in the next, in the tens of minutes.
And of course, it legitimizes the refrain that we're used to hearing in Chicago. If you don't like the weather, just wait 5 minutes. You'd think we'd be used to these drastic drops by now. How common is this, Paul?
Well, we get this quite often in the springtime, anywhere between April and maybe early June, when the lake temperatures are still rather cold. It takes much longer to heat up that cold water. And then when we have days like today with dry conditions and it was sunny and warm and it was beautiful, that sets up a really big temperature difference across from the water to the land. And that allows the pressure to build up over Lake Michigan. Eventually that cold air, as we get an upper level disturbance coming southward, starts to push inland. You'll see it hit Racine, Wisconsin, Kenosha, then you go to Waukegan, Milwaukee Airport, then O'Hare, then DuPage and Midway airports, and it will continue to push to the southeast, maybe as far as Joliet. Usually when you get out far enough south and far enough west, it's not so bad.
Looks pretty out there. 15 seconds before we let you go, Paul. Is it very difficult to predict this kind of a front?
No, these things are pretty well handled by the models. Lake Michigan, when we look at our numerical models for temperatures, shows up really cold in the high resolution models. And when you have these lighter winds in the area and an upper level disturbance coming out of Canada, which also will be smoke in the air, so we might have some gorgeous sunset tonight. But those are usually the days that we expect these backdoor cold fronts or pneumonia fronts.
All right, hopefully nobody actually gets pneumonia. Paul Servatka at College of DuPage, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Oof, I think I just felt it. And now to some more of today's top stories. Mayor Brandon Johnson addressed the city's migrant situation today, one of several public events, on his first full day in office. The mayor toured the Chicago Police Department's 12th District Station, which is temporarily housing asylum seekers due to overcrowding elsewhere. And he then spoke here at a temporary respite center located on the south side's Piotrowski Park in Little Village. Johnson talked about his day one executive order to create a deputy mayor for immigrant, migrant, and refugee rights.
It's going to be to bring the government and the community closer together. That's also going to entail making sure that the resources that we have not tapped into, this person will be responsible with a team of individuals to make sure that we're tapping into those resources.
Johnson also paid respects at the memorial for fallen Chicago police officer Ariana Preston. Preston's funeral will be held tomorrow, and we'll have a full recap on tomorrow's program.
And those migrants who've been sleeping at police stations across Chicago are getting something they may not have had in days or weeks: a hot shower.
We average about 40 to 50 showers a day. That's only in one location within 2 hours. But if we were to visit more locations around the city, we usually provide no less than 60 showers a day. We expect this number to grow.
The organization Shower Up offers mobile showers to unhoused people in the city, but lately the group says it's doubled its resources, providing a lot more showers than usual because of the migrant crisis. Today, the group parked a mobile unit outside CPD's station near Palmer Square. Shower Up says it's taking contributions to help its efforts.
Could lightning strike for the Bulls like it recently did for the Blackhawks? The NBA draft lottery takes place tonight at 7 at McCormick Place. It'll determine who gets that coveted first pick and the right to select 7'3" French sensation Victor Wembanyama. The Bulls are one of 14 teams that miss the playoffs and are thus part of the drawing to go first, although they only have about a 1.8% chance of landing that top spot.
Foo Fighters, Ani DeFranco, and Parliament Funkadelic are just a few of the performers fans can see at Riot Fest, which announced its lineup today. That's all if the Chicago Park District approves the festival's permit. The annual Music Fest is slated for September in Douglas Park. But Riot Fest and 2 other festivals have taken criticism from community members who say the events hijacked green space for weeks, preventing residents from using the park and damaging the grounds. 2 other festivals have already announced plans to move to a different venue. And for more on the Park District's next steps, please visit our website.
And coming up in the program, how will Chicago's new mayor tackle the city's mental health challenges?
But first, a new gun control tactic: liability for gun manufacturers. Amanda Vinicki is live in Springfield right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Illinois' assault weapons ban faces a major hurdle, even as Democrats look to pass more gun control laws before the spring legislative session is over. Amanda Vinicki joins us now from the Capitol in Springfield. Amanda, what's the latest?
Yes, Paris, after 7 people were shot and killed at Highland Park's Independence Day Parade, Illinois in January took a major, albeit controversial, step toward limiting what guns can be sold and used in state. Now that assault weapons ban itself is under assault, legally anyway. The Illinois Supreme Court today tasked with weighing the law's constitutionality. They have to decide whether they agree with a downstate judge who ruled that the law violates Illinois' Equal Protections constitutional clause. Now, that means that plaintiffs say that all individuals, and in this case, they mean gun owners, should be treated equally. And they say instead, Illinois' law allows those who previously owned guns like AR-15s to keep them, as well as police, certain cases security guards and prison wardens, that the law means there isn't that equal protection.
A military veteran is trained, but he can't have that weapon to protect his family at home. A security guard may or may not be trained, but he has it only while he works. Heller and McDonald both say the Second Amendment elevates above all interests. It's not tolerating interest for a police officer, interest for a security guard, interest for a prison warden.
But Illinois' Attorney General says there is a rational basis for those categories. Police must, for example, take ongoing training to be able to know how to use those military-grade and assault-grade weapons. He says Illinois residents are losing their lives.
Do you want more people to go out and get those weapons and go to parades and commit mass shootings? I don't. And I don't think the legislature does either.
Now, there's also federal court action with this law, and a case is awaiting action from a U.S. appeals court. A lot, of course, hangs on that legal verdict, but meanwhile, you have gun advocates like Moms Demand Action here in Springfield today asking lawmakers to do more. They want laws that allow private citizens to be able to sue gun manufacturers, also to let police seize guns from someone if a domestic violence victim wins an order of protection against them. And then also a measure that would revive cold cases. That's something that is very important to Valerie Burgess, whose son was shot on the south side of Chicago in 2013. Almost a decade later, his murder still unsolved. She says that her son left behind 2 children, one of whom is 10 years old and is asking questions.
Why did they shoot my daddy? Yeah. And I had to tell him, I don't know. His next question was, did they catch who did it? Again, my answer was no. And I want to say not yet, because I still have hope.
Now, despite Democratic supermajorities in the General Assembly and a governor who supports gun control measures, none of those measures are for sure going to happen by the end of this week when adjournment is scheduled. I will be here, though, for any potential developments. For now, though, Paris, back to you.
All right, Amanda, thanks very much. And now we go to Brandis with a look at the lobbying blitz around a push to tighten rideshare safety standards. Brandis.
In Paris, rideshare giant Uber is ringing alarm bells about the impact of a bill in Springfield that could become law soon. The measure would apply the so-called common carrier safety standard to rideshare companies. That's the same standard for transportation methods like taxis, trains, and airplanes, and would hold Uber and Lyft liable if harm comes to a passenger, not just the driver. As Chicago Tonight's Nick Blumberg reports, the lobbying and advertising blitz against the measure doesn't appear to have swayed lawmakers.
Emails and push notifications to customers, a reported 6-figure ad buy on popular radio stations, and ads on news sites covering the General Assembly, and a slew of lobbying. Uber has been pushing back hard against the common carrier proposal, but Patrick Salvi says their arguments don't hold up.
For them to suggest that, well, fares are going to go up, well, that doesn't really make sense because those with whom they're competing are already common carriers.
Salvi, the president of the Illinois Trial Lawyers Association, also says Uber's claim that rides won't be as widely available is hard to believe.
I'm trying to imagine a driver that would otherwise sign up for Lyft and Uber or some other rideshare company and say, well, wait a minute, I'm considered a common carrier. I don't want to be held to the highest duty of care.
Uber's even taken its pitch about reduced service directly to the head of the Democratic National Committee, warning of consequences for next year's convention. Quote, "We don't want you caught off guard if the availability of on-demand transportation is less than anticipated as a result of the new law."
We think Springfield should be focusing on trying to make life more affordable for middle working class people.
Phil Mellon is executive director of Citizens Against Lawsuit Abuse's Illinois chapter.
When you hail a rideshare service, you're not a customer of Uber or Lyft. They're more like a dispatch company. The person that you're having the common carrier relationship with is the driver.
Mellon says ITLA's practice of donating to lawmakers, including more than $400,000 to sponsors of the common carrier bill over the last 3 years, means the trial lawyers have unfair sway.
When you're out at night, paying a little extra for your ride home, it's not just an accident.
Mellon says he's not accusing ITLA of breaking any laws, but ITLA's Salvi says even suggesting that donating to lawmakers is pay to play is irresponsible.
We represent people in their darkest times when they're hurt horribly, and we of course have an interest in protecting those rights, whereas people that are looking to do tort reform, they'd rather businesses reap all the profits and not have accountability.
Groups like Mellon's have reportedly been funded by big corporations pushing for tort reform that would make it harder for plaintiffs to sue companies. Mellon says the Illinois chapter is made up of small businesses. There's also been many online ad buys from Uber and ITLA clearly targeted at lawmakers, but that don't count as directly lobbying legislators.
Have all voted who wish?
Whatever the spending on both sides, the common carrier argument has so far won the day. Versions of the bill have passed the House and Senate. Lawmakers have until the end of the week to work out a final version and send it to the governor. For Chicago Tonight, I'm Nick Blumberg.
Lyft previously opposed the bill, but has since shifted to neutral. That shift reportedly came after an amendment delaying when the rule would take effect, and that would let rideshare companies operate for at least an additional 5 years in Illinois. Up next, a look at Brandon Johnson's approach to mental health clinics. Stay with us.
Mayor Brandon Johnson is vowing a different approach to mental health care than his two predecessors. He says he will reopen 6 publicly run mental health clinics that closed more than a decade ago. And here he is at his inauguration yesterday.
So let's bring together the private sector, the public sector, the county, the state, and the federal government to find the best solutions for delivering these services, including reopening our mental health care centers across the city of Chicago.
And joining us are Dr. Eric Reinhardt, political anthropologist of public health and law, physician and psychoanalyst at Northwestern University, and Arturo Carrillo, director of health and violence prevention at Brighton Park Neighborhood Council and co-lead of the Collaborative for Community Wellness. We also reached out to the Chicago Department of Public Health to join us for this conversation, but they declined us tonight. We do appreciate both of you being here. First with you, Dr. Reinhardt. Explain for us the mental health care infrastructure that the city has in place now, at least public infrastructure.
Yeah, right now there are 5 city-run mental health clinics. The vast majority of the mental health infrastructure in Chicago is private. Some of that infrastructure is federally qualified health centers, which are generally nonprofit organizations, and then we have our large hospital systems and their clinical infrastructure. What we lack is an infrastructure to respond to people who have greatest need, who don't necessarily have capacity to pay, or don't have good enough insurance to get into a lot of existing providers.
And Arturo Carrillo, that was going to be my next question for you. So given kind of the loose network of nonprofits or federally qualified health centers that exist now, are there barriers for the average Chicagoan who might want to access this health care?
Yes, absolutely. We see long wait lists for services. We see a lot of gaps in coverage. And unfortunately, what we see also is there's a lack of accountability. So we really don't know what types of services, what the quality of services are that these providers that are funded by the city are actually providing people.
All right, and according to the Chicago Department of Public Health, there are still 5 city-run mental health centers that are open. They only see a very small fraction of the total number of patients that the city sees, and as you mentioned, they go to some of those other organizations. So what is the argument then for reopening those mental health clinics?
Yeah. You have to put this in historical perspective. So over the last 40 years, since Ronald Reagan and then Bill Clinton, we've had a decimation of our public health infrastructure in the U.S. It used to be under Harold Washington that the city of Chicago is one of the biggest providers, maybe the biggest provider of ambulatory care service in Chicago. That has all gone away. That doesn't exist at all anymore. All of the money that used to be given to public infrastructure to provide for people's needs has gone to nonprofit organizations, some of which do excellent work. But as Dr. Carrillo just said, there isn't an accountability infrastructure. What you have is layers and layers of grant making, where you have a whole bunch of really smart people spending all of their time trying to get grants and then getting sub-grants, et cetera. There's huge inefficiency. There are perverse incentives for these nonprofit organizations to prioritize their own organizational reproduction, their own budgets, over providing care to people, not through any fault of their own. That's just what the structure enforces on them. So when you have a private healthcare infrastructure like we have across the U.S., what you have are horrific outcomes. We have the worst, without question, the worst healthcare system in the entire developed world, the worst public health system in the entire public world, and the developed world. And this is a consequence of decades of privatization. So the argument for rebuilding public infrastructure now is that look at what we have. It is an absolute failure. We have to build another kind of model, which you see across the world, and you've seen before in the US. And this is a model where you can take public dollars and make sure that they are going towards providing services to people who need them most.
And as you said, having the city have some accountability for the outcomes here, rather than just kind of maybe throwing money at an organization and not keeping track of what happens. So Arturo Carrillo, given the barriers that we talked about, given some of the issues that Dr. Reinhardt brought up, how would reopening mental health centers run by the city solve some of these things in your eyes?
Yes, well, the previous administration really set up a house of cards. What we see with this lack of accountability is that the contracts that are provided to these private providers, and we're looking at actual numbers from fiscal year 2022, have served an absurd range, anywhere from 16 people to over 4,000 people. So even though the city touted that it was serving thousands of people, we don't know what those services actually provided. And worse yet, that funding all goes away when federal relief expires in a year or two. So for us, building this permanent infrastructure, building it into the city as part of its permanent infrastructure of service of care for community residents throughout the entire city is an exciting opportunity that this administration now has to reopen these centers, to make them, again, a resource for everybody, just like we have currently libraries and parks that are available and accessible to everyone in the community and are part of our permanent infrastructure. We have that opportunity now in reopening these centers and expanding them as part of a non-police crisis response program that could be established and rolled out citywide.
And I should mention some of those places like libraries and parks are offering mental health services, part of this kind of patchwork. Dr. Reinhardt, Mayor Rahm Emanuel, Mayor Lori Lightfoot kind of cited the costs as reasons for not being able to sustain these centers, that the system that's in place now is more cost efficient. What would it cost?
It would cost a lot of money, frankly. Caring for people costs money. But if there's anything that government should be investing money in, it's caring for its population. What we have in Chicago, like in places around the U.S., is a choice to prioritize punishment and reaction. That can be through healthcare treatment, which is reacting to disease that's already arisen, or that can be through policing that's responding to violence that has already occurred. And we have systematically failed to invest in preventative infrastructure. So yes, it will be expensive.
And these are arguments that the current mayor has made for reopening these clinics. We'll follow what this administration does. We have to leave this discussion here. Dr. Eric Reinhold, Arturo Carrillo, thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And up next, why Chicago leads the country in exonerations. But first, we take a look at the weather.
For the 5th year in a row, Chicago is the wrongful conviction capital of the United States. That's according to a new report from the National Registry of Exonerations. WTTW News reporter Heather Sharon joins us now with more. And Heather, 124 people were exonerated in 2022 after being convicted in Cook County. How does that compare with the rest of the nation?
In all, 233 people were exonerated nationwide. There were 2 other exonerations in Illinois, one in Will County and one in Lake County, but no other state had more than Illinois. Michigan had 16 exonerations and Texas had 11. No other state reached double digits.
Okay, so the vast majority of those exonerations were tied to misconduct by 2 former Chicago police officers, Sergeant Ronald Watts and Detective Ronaldo Guevara. What are they accused of doing?
Well, Ronald Watts, for more than a decade, policed the IDB Wells housing project, and he is accused and was convicted of corruption in basically extorting visitors and residents of the housing project. Detective Guevara was a judge found routinely lied under oath and is accused of framing suspects.
In 2022, Chicago taxpayers spent at least $98 million to settle lawsuits alleging misconduct by Chicago police officers. What do these exonerations cost the city?
Conservatively, tens of millions of dollars, although we won't know for many years. In September 2021, 2 men who were convicted based on evidence developed by Detective Guevara were each paid $10.5 million by the city after spending 23 years in prison for a crime they were later exonerated of. This is a massive drain on the city's finances.
Not to mention, finances, but also trust in the Chicago Police Department. And this is no doubt bad news for brand new Mayor Brandon Johnson. He's vowed to reform the police department and to stop spending millions to settle lawsuits alleging misconduct by officers. What does Chicago's status as the wrongful conviction capital of the country tell us about the challenges that he faces?
They're just enormous. So whoever is the next top cop is going to have to address these reform questions Chicagoans. For at least the next 4 years, the city will remain under a court order requiring it how it polices specifically Black and Latino Chicagoans. I should note that all but one of the people exonerated in 22 were either Black or Latino. That consent decree was based on a 2017 Department of Justice report that found that Black and Latino Chicagoans routinely had their constitutional rights violated. That's going to be job number one for Mayor Johnson and whoever the next police superintendent is.
Okay, not a small task at hand. Heather Sharon, thank you so much.
Thanks, Brandis.
And you can read Heather's full story on our website. That's WTTW.com/news. And we're back to wrap things up right after this. And that's our show for this Tuesday night. Please join us tomorrow night at 5:30 and 10. We take you inside the funeral of fallen Chicago police officer Ariana Preston.
And arts correspondent Angel Ito introduces us to a local artist committed to community. And now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a proud sponsor of diversity, equity, and inclusion-focused free continuing legal education for lawyers throughout the region.